Need a Wi-Fi scanner and survey tool that won't kill your budget? Try Wi-Fi Scanner for Windows. It's an all-in-one tool to explore Wi-Fi access points, test speed, and perform active and passive surveys. Built by Wi-Fi engineers for Wi-Fi engineers. Visit wifiscanner.com to start your free trial today.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Stand podcast. This is Francois. I'm here this morning with Roel. Hey Roel, how are you?
Hey, good morning.
Yeah, and as usual, we wanted to talk about different Wi-Fi related topics, and today on the agenda, we wanted to take an overview of the WPA3 personal security standard, because we're starting to talk more and more about it. We started to see it more and more in action, deployed in our enterprise environments. It's been there for a while. We'll take a look at some of the documentation, but in the real world, we're just starting to actually implement it, and I guess we'll talk about why as well. But today, I guess this episode is all about understanding WPA3 Personal or WPA3 SAE, and understand what changes it brings to the way an AP would broadcast a network and the way a client will associate to a network.
Yeah, so this is part one. We're going to have a part two talking about the enterprise solution and probably some of the radius implementation as well. But as Francois said, like we're just getting started with WPA3. If you're already implementing it in your environment, let us know and kind of tell us what your challenges have been migrating there to WPA3.
And I guess WPA3 has been around since 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we've just starting to actually implement it in our networks, and that's because of 6 GHz. We're seeing more and more 6 GHz compatible equipment. I believe in the US, most people who buy APs today buy 6 GHz compatible APs. And on 6 GHz, they actually have some minimum requirements when it comes to security. And WPA3 is one of these requirements. So you cannot just configure a WPA2 or WPA or open network on 6 GHz. It just doesn't work. So you have to kind of transition to WPA3, and that's why we're seeing more and more interest about it. That's why we're seeing people starting to implement and test it in their real world environments.
Yeah, and we'll go over some of the changes from WPA2 to WPA3 Personal. And the reason why we say test is because for some reason, devices still do not support WPA3, and there's some challenges there, but there is a mitigation to transition to WPA3.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I guess we can talk about this. Maybe we can start with the specifications, Roel. I'm sharing my screen, so as usual, we will post this on YouTube, so you guys can take a look at what we're showing you. If you are listening to this audio only, we'll try to be as descriptive as possible. And then when you get home, you can go to the show notes on the cleartostand.net website and get access to all of the links and the documentation images that we are showcasing during these recordings. So can you see my screen right now?
Yep, you can see it.
Okay. So, WPA3 is a certification that's defined by the Wi-Fi Alliance. So if you go on the Wi-Fi Alliance website, you can actually download the PDF that I'm showing you right now, and it's called WPA3 specifications, and they kind of details the minimum requirements that will qualify a device, a station, or an access point as a WPA3 AP or clients. So they have some rules that they've defined, and everything is in this specification document. So if you look at this document, you can actually see the very first time that that document was released, and the date is 2018, April 9th. So that was the very first version. Right now, we're up to version 3.1, which was released on the 23rd of November last year, 2022. But you can see that, this WPA3 certification has been around for a little while.
Yeah.
And if we look, if we start to look at the details of this certification, you can see that we have, I guess, three main sections. We have WPA3-Personal, which is what we're talking about today in this episode. We also have WPA3 Enterprise, and we'll talk about this in a part 2 episode. And they also have something related to the fast BSS transition. So they have something called WPA3 Fast BSS Transition. Um, yeah. So if I look at the section on WPA2 Personal, and in the PDF I kind of outlined a couple of things that they specify in that section. But the first thing they specify is that they're actually defining two modes of operation. They have the WPA3 personal only mode, and they have the WPA3 personal transition mode. And that goes back to what you were saying, Roel, about having a way to kind of transition from WPA2 to WPA3.
Yeah, to maintain that backwards compatibility for devices that cannot join to a WPA3 network. And we're going to have those types of devices for a long time because of
Mhm.
IoT type devices that haven't been updated.
Yes, exactly. And for each of these modes, so personal only and personal transition mode, they have a set of requirements. Um, so if you're looking at this, you can see I've outlined a couple of the requirements which I think are important, and plus we can cross-reference this with looking at the beacons that our APs are broadcasting when we configure WPA3. So we will go back to Wi-Fi Explorer and kind of cross-reference that information. But the first requirement is they're saying that an AP shall enable at least AKM suite number 8 in the BSS. So
Yeah.
when you configure WPA3 personal only SSID, you will see that under the RSN information element, under the AKM suite list, you will get number 8, which corresponds to WPA3 personal.
Yeah. And that there is where you have those compatibility problems with older devices. They won't
Mm-hmm.
understand what that is. It's just not in their updated drivers to know what AKM Suite 8 is.
Exactly. And then they're also telling you that if it's WPA3 personal only, you cannot have any other AKM suites, which is obvious, but they're telling you that you're not allowed to have like a PSK or older AKM suite, what we used to use for WPA and WPA personal. So it has to be only the new one, the number 8. And then the other interesting thing, point 5 and 6 here, is that in order to support WPA3 personal only, you also need to support MFP. So
Yeah.
MFP will have to be compatible and required. So MFP is required for WPA3 personal network. So you will see that you'll have 2 bits in the beacon. Same thing under the RSN information element. We'll go back to the beacons and show you. But these 2 bits, the MFP capable and MFP required, will have to be set to 1 if you set up a WPA3 personal network.
Yeah, and management frame protection has been around for a long time, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember like a few years back, maybe like 3 or 4, actually maybe 5 years back, having been to an environment that had MFP enabled, and for some reason it lowered the throughput dramatically for all
Mm-hmm.
those devices, and so it's come a long way to now make it required and having it work properly on our networks.
Yeah, MFP is one of these security requirements that are also mandatory for 6 gigahertz. And it's mandatory for WPA3, as you can see here. So, I'm expecting us to see that becoming a standard in the coming years. So hopefully it works better for us in the field. And the last point that I outlined here that I think is important is that they're mentioning that WEP and TKIP shall not be enabled when
Yeah.
you use WPA3 personal. Which, I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it's always good to kind of
Yeah.
specify that there's no backward compatibility with previous security mechanism
Yeah.
when you use.
Very, yeah. Very old
Yeah,
security mechanisms with vulnerabilities in it.
yeah, good
But we
point.
know that there's going to be environments where they must have WEP and TKIP enabled because of
Hmm.
the critical old devices that they're still using. But WPA3 personal, when you enable it only WPA3 personal only mode, this is moving forward in security. So we're not enabling older security methods.
So should we look at the beacon frame before we move to the transition mode?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I have Wi-Fi Explorer Pro open here, and I have a couple of SSIDs that I've configured in my office. One is WPA3 only, one is WPA3 transition. So we can look at the differences. Um, so if I take a look at my WPA3 only SSID, and I look at the information element that I have, in the beacon frame that the AP is sending me, if you look for the RSN, robust secure network information element, I can open it, and under the RSN information element, you'll be able to find something called the auth key management suites. And if I open this section, then I can see that I'm using, what they call the SAE SHA-256 authentication key management suite. And you can see that, here it will be the same thing in Wireshark, but in Wi-Fi
Yeah.
Explorer, it's showing me the 8 that
Mhm.
was referenced in the standards as well in the specification for the WPA3. So you can see here that it matches what we had in the specification. The AKM suite number kind of matches what we had, and you can see that this is the only AKM number I have. So I don't have multiple AKM numbers. I just have the number eight that corresponds to SAE, simultaneous authentication of equals.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the first thing. Then now, if I look at my RSN capabilities, which is still under my RSN information element, I can expand that one. And this is where you will see the management frame protection required and capable bits. And you can see that in this case, for the WPA3 only SSID, both of them are set to 1,
Yep.
which also makes sense because it complies with the
With the
specification.
specification. Yeah. So that and maybe it's important to mention SAE is simultaneous authentication of equals, and that is a whole different way of doing a key exchange, much more
Mhm.
secure than our previous method using WPA2.
Yes, and I guess we'll look at this when we look at the frames, and we'll see the difference between the new SAE and the old way of doing PSK
Yeah,
association. Make sense for the earn only mode?
it does.
Uh, yeah. So
Should
this
I
this is the one.
should I show everyone what WPA2 looks like just so you can see the difference? So
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to yours, Francois, and then I'll switch to my screen share. So again, right there, you see the auth key management suite, SAE, and management frame protection is required. I'll switch to my screen real quick just to show you WPA2. Okay, so here's WPA2. I'm looking at the probe response from the AP. And here on the left side, I've also expanded the RSN information. So I'm looking at this from Wireshark perspective versus Wi-Fi Explorer. But you can see here the auth key management suite. It's set to PSK2, and then I have management frame protection set to false, so it's not required. So as you compare both WPA2, WPA3, those are the differences that you'll see. All right, Francois,
Awesome.
you can.
Okay, so yeah, let's take a look at if I go back to the specification document from the Wi-Fi Alliance. Um, they're talking about the second mode, which is called the transition mode. And in the transition, so one thing I wanted to to mention for the personal only mode, this is the mode we will see on 6 gigahertz because that's the only mode
Yeah.
um, uh, you know um, allowed on 6 gigahertz. Now, if you on 5 gigahertz or 2.4 gigahertz and you still have some older equipment that do not necessarily support WPA3 at the moment, what you can do is you can use this transition mode. And when you have this transition mode, you will see that the AP, instead of only advertising the AKM, the new one, AKM number 8, you can also advertise AKM number 2, the one you've just showed in Wireshark. So you can
Yeah.
actually advertise two AKM suites, number 2, which is the old PSK, and number 8, which is the SAE, right?
Yep.
And that should give the client the choice, to either use the old way of doing things or the new way of doing things.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the idea.
Yeah. And hopefully a device that is capable of doing WPA3 will use the WPA3 method.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what the specification says.
That's what the specification says, but maybe drivers might say a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then they say that related to the MFP. Remember how we have the MFP capable and MFP required bit? Well, in case of transition, the MFP capable has to be set to 1, but the MFP required has to be set to 0. Okay, and that's just to allow non-MFP devices to be able to connect to the network.
Yeah.
And then they have another point that I've outlined here out of the 8 different requirement, and it says that an AP shall reject an association for SAE if PMF is not negotiated for that association. So here they're just telling us that if you want to use SAE, if you want to use the AKM number 8, then you have to support MFP as well.
Mhm.
Okay, which makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, and this is where I don't like how the specifications and standards say this. So MFP and PMF,
Yes, yes.
they're essentially the same.
Yes, and sometimes I wonder why I'm confused, but now I know, right?
Yeah, we got
Uh,
management frame protection and protected management frame.
yeah, same thing, different acronym, I guess. Yeah, so this is pretty much what the personal is. And if I go back to my Wi-Fi Explorer so we can look at the beacon, I'm going to select the WPA3 transition beacon now. And same thing, I'm going to navigate to the RSN information element. And under the RSN information element, if I look at the list of my AKM suites, I can now see that I have 2 available, right? I have the older one, number 2, PSK, and I have the new one, number 8, SAE. So you can see that here, the AP is advertising 2 different AKM.
Yep.
And then if I look at the RSN capabilities, I should find my MFP bits, and you can see that the management frame protection required is set to 0, and the management frame protection capable is set to 1. So that
Yeah.
complies with the specifications.
Yeah. I think also another thing to note here in a real world scenario is even though you've got transition mode enabled, you still have 2 authentication key management suite types there. It
Mm-hmm.
is possible for a device to still be unable to join this SSID because it sees the SAE type and it just doesn't know what to do with that. If it's
Mm-hmm.
not, if it doesn't, react well, even though the PSK type there, the type 2 is there, it may freak out saying, "Hey, I don't know what this SAE is. I'm just not going to connect." So that is
Yeah.
possible still.
So that depends on the Wi-Fi drivers, and you know what? I had experiences where for WPA3 only network, devices will not understand SAE and they will just not connect. And I also had experiences with a transition mode where you know devices were, oh, I guess Wi-Fi drivers were not expecting multiple AKM,
Yeah.
and so they just take the first one in the list, and the first one
Mhm.
in the list might not be the one that they support, right? And so
Yeah.
they're gonna fail. So having multiple AKM suite is not, I guess that's something that's new for some Wi-Fi
Yeah.
drivers. And if the Wi-Fi driver was just lousily implemented, then you can have these type of issues. Um, so it's always a good idea to try to find the latest version of the Wi-Fi drivers. If you're implementing WPA3, make sure that the clients, your critical clients, are actually up to date, and that
Yeah.
will prevent some of these weird issues.
Mhm. Certainly. We'll be right back to the episode. Do you need a tool that offers seamless Wi Fi analysis and troubleshooting? Look no further to Wi Fi Scanner for Windows. It's a versatile 3-in-1 tool. Discover Wi Fi access points with ease, assess speed and performance accurately, and conduct detailed active and passive Wi Fi surveys seamlessly. It works perfectly with the internal card of your Windows device. The Wi Fi Scanner Copilot feature is ready to troubleshoot common issues related to connectivity, performance, security, and configurations. Broaden your reach by analyzing remote networks with Optify and WLAN Pi integration. Dive into beacon information or delve deeper by opening wireless PCAP files. Visit wifiscanner.com and download a free trial today.
Okay, so one thing I want to show you here quickly in Wi-Fi Explorer, is the fact that you can actually select two SSIDs. So I'm going to select my WPA3 and my WPA3 transition. And what Wi-Fi Explorer does is it compares both of them and it shows me the difference. So if I look at my RSN information element, I can click on it and it will show me the difference between the two. So I can see one has only one AKM, the other one has two, and you can see the differences that we've just talked about. This is a very neat feature. It does it
Yeah.
automatically when you just select two SS. Maybe I
Yeah.
can select three. I don't know. No.
No.
So you select two of them, it compares
Yeah.
the two.
So like, this is a new feature to me. I had no idea. This is a great way to teach other people like what the differences are between two
Hmm.
SSIDs, or if you're trying to analyze two SSIDs in an environment. This is really awesome. I like it. So thank you, Adrian, and Bits for doing this.
Yes, you're always surprised with a few, neat features like this. And I think I first saw this when Wes Purvis from Miss was doing a presentation, I think a webinar online, and I was like, "Whoa, that's super
Yeah.
neat." Especially when you were trying to explain all of these differences, it
Hmm.
makes it a little bit easier to explain and obvious to everyone.
So
Okay,
one thing
yeah.
that we didn't also mention. So if you scroll down there, the group management key is also the
Hmm.
cipher suite for the group keys are different.
Yes. Yes. So this is something that was added, for WPA3 here. So
Yeah.
what you see here in dark yellow is something that was added on that WPA3 um, SSID, and it's showing us that the group management type is BIP CMAC 128,
Yeah.
which is the one that they use for WPA3
Okay.
SAE.
So
Yeah.
also in a previous episode that we recorded on OWE, in transition mode, the OWE capable devices connect to a hidden SSID that is OWE.
Hmm.
In WPA3 transition, is that the same way where a WPA3 capable device will associate to a hidden SSID?
No, here it's so with WPA3 transition mode, it's a little bit different. We don't have an extra SSID. Everything happens in the same SSID, but we're advertising the two AKM suites, and that's how we can advertise support for the old and the new, because they're using pretty much the same way of connecting. That's enough, I guess, to kind of
Yeah.
differentiate the two. So you don't need an extra SSID with a different, like with OWE and Open. There's a big difference in the way the
Yeah.
client associates to the network. So you kind of have to You need two different SSIDs so that it works properly when the client comes and connect. For in difference between PSK and SAE, we're still going to have the authentication, the association, the four-way handshake. We may have a little bit of differences there, but it's still the same structure. So you don't
Yeah.
actually need an extra SSID to make it work.
Yeah. Here in this case, we're going to encrypt either way. It's just
Hmm.
two different methods of encrypting.
Exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. So actually, we can start looking at the frames now, and looking at what an association would look like. And we could start with WPA3 only mode. Um, so let me see if I can open Wireshark. Zoom in a little bit. Can you see this?
Yeah. Look at all those.
Yeah, look at all of these frames. Okay, if you're listening to this podcast, we are just looking at Wireshark. The beauty of Wireshark with all of the colors. Um, And what we've done just before this episode was capturing an association of a device. So I took my phone, connected it to the WPA3 only SSID, and we wanted to kind of understand, what's different from the frame exchange perspective between SAE and PSK, so WPA2. And so you can see that my device sent a probe request, and then he got a probe response from the AP saying that this network is available. And in the probe response, I should be able to see the same RSN information that shows me that this SSID supports SAE. And as you can see, this is what it's showing us here. So we can see exactly the same thing as what we saw in Wi-Fi Explorer. And then the device, my client device, will send an authentication frame. And here, what's interesting is you can see that we actually have four different authentication frame exchanged
Yeah.
between the client and the AP, right? It used to
Hmm.
be two, right? It used to
Yeah.
just be like an open authentication with a two-way packet exchange between the client and the AP. But now with SAE, if I'm looking at that first authentication frame and I look at the details, you can see that it's not an open authentication anymore.
Yeah.
It's what they call the SAE, simultaneous authentication of equals, number three. And so we're going to change a little bit the way we authenticate to the network by introducing these new authentication methods.
Yeah.
Um, if we go back to the beginning of the 8.11 standards, at the beginning we had two ways of authenticating to the network. We had the open system authentication, and we had the web way of doing things. And when we transitioned to WPA2, we kind of moved away from the web authentication, and we used open system authentication for years. And so here now with SAE, we are leveraging these authentication frames again, but for the new way of doing things with SAE. And this is where SAE is implemented, is, while doing that initial 8.11 authentication.
Hmm.
So looking at the frames, you will kind of see the different SAE messages. So the first one is sent by the clients to the AP. My AP response sends another SAE information saying here the status is successful, and then the client will send another SAE message called the confirm one, and finally the AP will say confirm successful. And then after the authentication is finished, then we can move to the association. So the clients, as usual, will send the association request, providing its capabilities, its credentials, and the AP will say will send an association response and say, okay, here you go, everything is good, status is successful. Here's your association ID. And then once the association is done, what you see in blue here in Wireshark, this is the four-way handshake. So you're going to have the four-way handshake authentication. You can see the key messages here: message 104, 204,
Yeah.
304, 404, and this is just used to exchange those session keys.
Yeah.
And
So
after
we're
that,
adding
yeah,
a total of two additional frames, right? To the
yes,
two
to
additional.
the authentication.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then after that, it's business as usual. You have encryptions, and then the client and the AP can just send frames
Yeah.
to one another.
So if you look at your one of those data frames, or would it be
Hmm.
an action frame?
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting is you can see that right after my association here, I have an action frame. And here, if I look at the data, you can
It's
see that
encrypted.
it's encrypted, right? And that's because of MFP.
Yep.
Um, we could guess what this is. Usually, when an AP connects to a network, if you have 11K enabled, it would ask for a neighbor report. So I could guess that this is just the client asking the AP for a neighbor report. But I'm not 100% sure
Yeah.
um,
It's
because
hidden.
it's encrypted now because of
Yeah.
management frame protection.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. MFP will encrypt all of the basically the management frames of anything that's coordinating between AP and client. It's going to be
Yes.
encrypted, so it adds a level of complexity for troubleshooting, right?
It's not exactly all of the management frames. It's all of the management frames pretty much that I exchange after you associate it, right? So all of the
Yeah.
action ones, the disassociation, de-authentication, for
Yeah.
instance. Yes.
Yeah. And I think MFP was largely aimed towards preventing like deauthentication and disassociation attacks.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So maybe we can provide this speak app to you guys so you can play with it, take a deeper look at it. Or even better, if you can replicate this and capture your own frames, it's always a good practice
Yeah. It's good practice
to
for
do this.
CWAP.
Exactly. And so
Awesome.
now, if I look at the other one, the transition mode,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, so we have to kind of find the association. I I did this right before recording, so let me see if I can actually find the
Just
association.
gotta look for the colors.
Yeah, this is live, guys. Uh,
All right, time to use your filter.
it's yeah. Oh, look
There it
at
is.
that.
There it is.
Okay, I feel like I found it. Okay, so you can see that, and I have a whole bunch of de-authentication because on my phone I changed my MAC address to use my phone MAC address so I could actually filter it in Wireshark. But so you can see I have my prob response request prob response. Now in the prob response, if I look into the RSN capability information, I should be able to see that it's advertising multiple AKM. So let's validate this. Yeah, you can see
Yep.
that we have two AKM suites, PSK and SAE.
Yeah.
So then when I do the authentication, you can see that my client says, you know what, I want to do SAE. So it
Yeah.
does the SAE authentication, the same one as we've seen earlier. And then we have the association request, association response. So here you can see that this is very similar to what we had before because my phone actually supports WPA3 and decided to use it.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have the message 1, 2, 3, 4 from the 4-way handshake. You have a couple of data frames, and you have the same action frame as earlier, which is still encrypted.
Yeah. Yeah. So in transition mode, if the device didn't support WPA3, we would see the same type of frame capture that I showed, where you
Hmm.
don't see the SAE portion. It's just WPA2.
Exactly, exactly. So you can see that in the packet capture, the main difference is the authentication, and I guess the way the pairwise master key is generated for the 4-way handshake. Now we're using SAE, which is much more robust. Maybe one day we can do a little deep
Dive
dive on
into it. Yeah.
SAE. Yeah, it's quite complex when it comes to the encryption, um, but it's much more secure than what we used to have, and it allows to have like a specific session key for each of the devices. So it's not a shared password anymore. So even if you have the password, even if you retrieve the password, you won't be able to decrypt other people's traffic, for instance. So it's much more secure, and it fixes all of the problems we had with the pre-shared key uh, way of doing things.
Awesome. That's a good look at WPA3 personal only and transition mode.
Yeah, I mean, it gives like a nice overview of it. We can. I don't know about you, Roel, but I've been having like in my house the WPA3 network enabled
Yeah.
for a while, and I definitely see that it's becoming less and less of a problem, right? Maybe at the beginning, some devices didn't support it, didn't manage to connect to it, but
Yeah.
nowadays it's much better. So if you have devices and you've updated the Wi-Fi drivers, you have much more support for WPA3 than before. You still have those odd clients sometimes, but it's getting better. I feel like we're heading towards the right direction there.
Yeah, I think the migration to WPA3 will be easier than say going to WPA2. I mean not WPA, OWE,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because WPA3 would be more of a faster transition as more updated devices come out. Um, and that's WP2 is what's being used the most, right? Especially the pre-shared key method. And I think we'll just easily see people migrate to WPA3 personal, and eventually it'll just be kind of that default setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that we didn't talk about, if you're gonna do, like for example, with 6 gigahertz, is if you're gonna do WPA3, you may want to also enable that, have WPA3 on your 5 and 2.4 gigahertz rather than doing a WPA2 WPA3 mixed
Mm-hmm.
environment between the two bands, because then you could have, for example, your 6 gigahertz devices, they will associate to 5 and 2.4 eventually, right? It's not always going to stay on 6 gigahertz.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't, or what I haven't tested myself, is a roaming between WPA3 and WPA2 if you have that
Mm-hmm.
sort of configuration enabled.
Yes, and you have specification from from different vendors on how to do this. Um, they also have we also had like a couple of presentations right earlier this year at WPC. I believe some podcasts are also available on that subject, like transitioning and how to do it, the different strategies. um, I've talked about this a little bit, but yes, you have to be careful on how you configure in your SSIDs. And it's like you said, it's probably if you want to go ahead and deploy on 6 gigahertz and have the same SSIDs across your bands, then transition to WPA3 is what you want to do. Um,
Yeah. And if you
so.
control most of your devices, maybe that transition to WPA3 personal only
Hmm.
is going to be easier, but for a higher education, for example, with a lot of BYOD devices,
Hmm.
you may have to start with the transition mode in order to get to see that adoption, right? And so I'm currently in that phase where, for example, our EduRoam SSID, I have in one building transition mode enabled. And
Hmm.
every once in a while, I check to see, okay, which devices are connected. And I have not seen a device connect only to WPA2.
Okay,
So
nice.
I'm seeing all devices using WPA3 so far.
That's good. Okay, that's
Yeah.
encouraging. Okay,
Yeah.
and
So
then.
in that sort of transition, when you see everyone using WPA3, it may
Hmm.
be easier to just say, all right, WPA3 only.
Hmm. Hmm. And then, one thing that also we should mention is WPA3. We talk a lot about WPA3 with 6 gigahertz, but you can definitely configure WPA3 on 5 gigahertz and
Yeah.
2.4. So if you don't have 6 gigahertz AP today and you want to test it, do packet captures and all, just do it on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and you'll see whatever we've been showing you. So you don't have necessarily to wait to get 6 gigahertz
Yeah.
to start playing with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just required in 6 gigahertz. And
Yeah.
I should say that in my environment where I have WPA3 enabled, it's not even 6 gigahertz. It's only 2.4 and 5.
Okay.
I have 6 gigahertz APs, but I had to disable 6 gigahertz radios because of the
Mm-hmm.
PoE requirements. I don't have the switch that's capable of doing BT power.
Mm-hmm.
So in our follow up episode to this, we'll talk about enterprise, and hopefully I'll have a little bit more with Ed Jerome as kind of a real
Mm-hmm.
world example, seeing that, and also we have people in our community who are really testing WPA3 enterprise, so that'll be interesting to kind of see where it's at, and device support, and what it means for radius. Like, do we have to do something different for radius servers? So that's going to be part
Mm-hmm.
two of WPA3.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Roel, for your time this morning. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You got something out of this episode. We'll share, the capture, the packet captures and the images on the show notes. So if you head over to clear2send.net, you'll be able to find all of this information. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
All right,
Bye
bye
bye.
guys. Need a Wi-Fi scanner and survey tool that won't kill your budget? Try Wi-Fi Scanner for Windows. It's an all-in-one tool to explore Wi-Fi access points, test speed, and perform active and passive surveys. Built by Wi-Fi engineers for Wi-Fi engineers. Visit wifiscanner.com to start your free trial today.